to I'd like to welcome you to this uh, de- department chairs conversations put on by TPSE Math. If you're not familiar with TPSE, TPSE is Transforming Post-Secondary Education in Mathematics, and I'm Michael Dorf. I'm at Brigham Young University, but I'm Director of Strategy and Implementation for TPSE. And I wanted to welcome you to this and thank Kate Stevenson and Matt Ando who are hosting or organizing this particular department chairs conversation. And I wanted to I wanted to let you know about three events that we have coming up. So first of all, uh, TPSE Math has a leadership institute where we're training future leaders in the mathematics community, both as their own institutions and in a national setting. Some of the people who are participating in this conversation are involved with that. We will be having the next group um, start in the summer 2022, and the application deadline for that is April 15th. So if you have anybody in your department that you think would be a future good candidate for being a leader in the mathematics community, or you're a department chair at your institution in your department, um, encourage them to look at the TPSE Math website and look for the Leadership Institute program. We're especially interested in trying to get a diverse group of applicants so that the mathematics leadership community would represent the different types of mathematicians we have in the community. The second thing is TPSE Math will also be co-sponsoring a data science interdisciplinary training workshop for faculty. And this is an opportunity for faculty in mathematics and statistics to work with other faculty in a different STEM discipline on a project. So the project could be co-teaching a class at your own institution, co-mentoring students in undergraduate research in data science, or starting a data science minor or emphasis at your institution. So the idea is you're going to have maybe two or three people from the same institution come to this workshop. It'll be an in-person workshop at the end of June, and we have funding from NSF to pay for the costs for attendance, and there will be some money available for helping you with your project. Let's see. The third thing that I want to mention is TPSE is also working on a program we call Beams, and it's an attempt to provide diversity, equity, and inclusion resources available for departments who want to make improvement in those areas. So it's somewhat related with the AAAS's Sea Change program, and we're moving forward with that. So to find out more information about that, you can also go to the TPSE Math website and look for beams or diversity topics. And then the last announcement I want to give is that we will have the next department chairs conversation will be on Thursday, April 21st at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. So same time, April 21st. And so look for that, and you'll get an announcement about that too. So with that, I'll turn the time over to Kate and Matt.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Kate Stevenson. Matt where are you, Matt? There he is.
Well, you know how Zoom is on my screen. You and I are right next to each other.
There we go. Always aligned with the two of us. So we're delighted to welcome you here, and we want this to be interactive and to have you practice some of the skills that Nimmi's going to be talking about. That's going to mean that this is somewhat less polished than you might expect just a talk to be. So we hope that you have a computer in front of you, which we're guessing you do because you're here, but maybe you're on your phone. But there will be opportunities for you to try the tools that Nimmi's going to talk about. I'd like to introduce Dr. Kannankutty. who is a senior advisor to the office of the director of the National Science Foundation. She was formerly Deputy Division Director of the Division of Graduate Education, whose mission is to provide funding to support graduate students and the development of novel, innovative programs to prepare tomorrow's leaders in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. As deputy, Dr. Kannankutty provided oversight to over $250 million in annual funding in support of this mission. Prior to joining DGE, Dr. Kannankutty was a senior advisor and researcher at the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics, a federal statistical agency within the NSF. She is a national expert on the highly skilled workforce in the United States. As a researcher at that institute, Dr. Kannankutty was responsible for the development and implementation of a series of national surveys of the US science and engineering workforce. So you can see why we were eager to have her join us. She's given talks also at the Committee on Education for the American Mathematical Society and for TPSE before on this topic. We know that she's her deeply knowledgeable and engaging speaker. So without further ado, Nimmi, take it away.
Thank you so much, Kate, and thank you, Matt, and everyone here at TPSE for inviting me today. Now that I've moved into this different role in the Office of the Director at NSF, much of my job revolves around policy and policy development at the agency. And one of the big issues that we're addressing right now are what we call the missing millions in science and engineering. Right? Those are those individuals that we really know have the capability to participate in the STEM pathway, but they don't. And as we're looking at what we can do to push the policy levers that NSF has to improve diversity in STEM, one of the big challenges is data. Where is the data? What kind of data do we have? And can we access it? And in many cases, people are not aware of the many data tools that are actually available to everyone right on their desktops. So today is an opportunity for me to share with you some of those kinds of tools. And I recognize that as department chairs and faculty and many of you are administrators as well, there isn't a lot of time to approach this as one might as a researcher. You need other sources that have maybe polished the data or compiled it in some way. So today, what I want to show you are different ways of accessing data. It is not the case that you have to go and pull some national database in order to understand what's going on with the students, either at your institution or nationally. And so my goal today is to make you aware of some of these tools. I'm actually going to step through many of them. I would encourage you to try doing that as well. I think it might be a little challenging today, but what I'm going to be doing is my presentation actually is a step-by-step through many of these tools, and all the links are there. So you will be able to go back and hopefully recreate some of the things that I'm doing. And if you're not able to do that, all the tools I'm showing you have lots of tutorials, or of course, I would be more than happy to walk you through some of these. So with that, let me just go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen. And let me pull up, and Kate, can you just nod if you tell me you can see the slideshow? Cool. Okay, so let me just get started. So first, a little overview of what I want to do. I want to set the context for what I'm going to talk about today. I want to make sure that I hit on several kinds of trends, the pre-college achievement, undergraduate indicators, and then workforce indicators. I'm primarily going to focus on undergraduate students today, but similar kinds of data are available for those who are in graduate pathways, but we'll focus on undergraduate today. And then, of course, I want to go through some of the tools that you can use to explore this data. So the first thing it's important to understand is the context. How do we look at the data? And I'm sharing this kind of human resources data continuum with you. So on the left-hand side, we have pre-college education. then undergraduate enrollments in degrees, graduate enrollments in degrees, and then the workforce. You know, it looks like it's linear, but it's not. People move back and forth between these different points of this continuum. So overall, all the data tools, what they're intended to do or answer the kinds of questions that you see on this slide. You know, how many people are at each stage of these different pathways? What do their demographic characteristics look like? What are the trends at each of these waypoints? And then how does performance at one stage relate to the other? So a lot of the tools are focused around this. Okay, but now I want you to step back and think about like, all the things that have changed in the education and workforce, pathways. So, you know, in the 1960s, we had a very different world than we do right now. Today, we have much more interdisciplinary focus in our educational programs. We have a lot of growth in the higher education sector abroad, which means that the US is not the only place that students are attracted to get a higher education. In the US, also, we have greater racial, ethnic, and gender diversity. It's still not where we want it to be, but it's definitely improved since the 1960s. Another characteristics in the United States is that we have an increase in foreign students and foreign postdocs. And I will say that is now translating down even at the undergraduate level, where we're seeing many more undergraduate students who are coming directly to, you know, from other countries to get their bachelor's degrees. And then another important thing, probably more so for graduate education, is the growth of for-profit institutions and online programs. Certainly you see that at the undergraduate level, but we also see that in certain fields, for-profit institutions are becoming pretty prominent players at the graduate level. So for example, in psychology or in computer science. So that's how STEM higher education has changed over the last 50 or 60 years. The workforce has changed as well. In the 1960s, we had a very small portion of workers who were in S&E occupations, and it's much larger today. We know that in the past, it was the case that, you know, if you got an engineering degree, you were very likely to become an engineer. That is simply not the case today. People with STEM degrees and skills work in a wide variety of STEM and non-STEM occupations. And I'm actually going to be able to show you that a little bit later today among those with math degrees. We certainly have an increase in collaborative and multidisciplinary work, which implies that the training that individuals need to get needs to reflect that workforce reality. Again, just as we saw in the education pathways, we have a lot more diversity in the workforce. The US used to be the leader in attracting STEM talent all over the world, but now there is greater competition from other countries. And so that's another thing to consider, certainly for some of our disciplines that where there are a large proportion of foreign students, it's not necessarily the case that that will continue in the future. And probably the most important thing in the workforce is that, you know, folks don't just get a job and stay in that job for their careers. STEM workers in particular make frequent moves across sectors, across jobs, and across economies. And again, that points to the need for very flexible types of training and education. So I'm actually going to get started now to talk about some of the tools. But before I did that, I just wanted to stop and see if there were any questions or comments. Kate and Matt, you can maybe tell me if I can just go on or, okay, great. Okay, so Kate and Matt and I met a couple months ago. We started thinking about what were some of the types of questions that might be interesting today. And this is one of the first questions that came up, the trends in bachelor's degrees attainment in math. And what I want to do is show you 3 different ways and 3 different tools that will show us different types of information about trends in bachelor's degree attainment. So the first one that I want to show you is a type of tool that is from compiled data and analysis. This is something that everything's already been done and you can just pick it up and use it. The second type of tool I want to show you is similar, but it has more disaggregated data. In this case, We'll start with, for the compiled data analysis, we'll start with overall trends in math degree attainment. And then in using the compiled and disaggregated data, I'll show you that same data by race and ethnicity and gender. And then the third one, we'll do some custom tables where I'm going to be able to show you the same information at an institutional level, so you could actually look at your own institution. So this is the first example. This is actually the trends in bachelor's degrees attained in math between 2000 and 2019. So this is kind of the end point, and now I'm going to take you through how did I find this? Okay, so I pulled this particular figure from a report called Science and Engineering Indicators. This is a biennial report that NSF produces for the President and Congress, and it gives kind of the state of science and engineering in the United States. So it's a general starting point for a lot of in-depth data analysis. Some of you may be familiar with this report. The report is produced by the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics, which is a federal statistical agency. Kate mentioned that is one of the places that I had worked for before. And you know, to put it in context, many of you are familiar with the Census Bureau or the Bureau of Labor Statistics. This is the federal statistical agency that focuses on science and technology. So that's the equivalent there. So the Science and Engineering Indicators report, it's a high-level summary, but it also is accompanied by in-depth topical reports. And one of those topical reports is higher education in science and engineering. So this is national data on long-term trends in STEM higher ed. So that's not only degrees, but enrollments. And another part of the report has R&D funding and so on. And within the higher ed report, there's a section on undergraduate degree awards. So this is like really, really specific just about undergraduate degree trends. So all of the underlined links on this slide are the places that I'm going to go to, and you'll be able to go back and step through all of these links later. But let me just jump over to the web. And if there are any problems or any delays, please let me know, okay? So I'm going to jump right over to indicators. So this is the Science and Engineering Indicators report. It was just released in January of 2022. So for those of you who'd like to have a look, please, I would really encourage you to go and read this short report. Now, over on the right-hand side, you can see that there's the topical report, Higher Education in Science and Engineering. I'm just going to click on that. And then it'll bring a little synopsis up of the report. And if I hit continue reading, it will take me right into the report. Every report starts with an executive summary. And then on the left-hand side, you can see all of these different links to the different sections of the report. And the one we're particularly going to be interested in is the one on trends in undergraduate and graduate S&E degree awards. So I'm just going to click that plus button, and then it's going to show me where the undergraduate degree awards are. So let me just click right there, and will take me right to the section of the report that has the trends in undergraduate and graduate degrees. It's going to take me to the section that I selected, which is the undergraduate degree awards. And I'm going to scroll through this really fast, but I want to make you aware of all the in-depth analysis that has already been done. This is incredibly helpful context to understand the data that I'm going to show you. So I will just scroll down. It starts with associate's degrees, and you can see the trends there. And you'll see mathematics and statistics. There are the trends in the associate's degrees. The next section down are SME technology degrees awarded. And finally, after a bunch of more scrolling, I get to the S&E bachelor's degrees. And here's the figure that I showed you in my slides. And I'm going to click, there are lots of different ways you can get access to this data. You can download it where you can get the Excel file. You can share it on social media. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open it, pop it up so that I can see the entire figure on my screen. And what you see here is the actual chart, and it's a somewhat interactive chart. So for example, if I wanted to look at a particular field, I would just kind of hover over the name. So in this case, I hovered over math and statistics, and it kind of pops out a little bit more. I can also turn off some of the, if I didn't want to see some of the other disciplines, I could just kind of turn them off for comparison purposes. So these are just some of the interactive features that are available. Then if I go down here and I click the data view, I can actually see the data. And you can download any of this as you would like. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my slides. And so that's kind of that first chart that I just showed you. And now I'm going to go into the next example. So this is the same data set that I showed you that figure came from, but it shows the data in a little different way. This is a data table. And what it shows is math degrees in 2008 and 2018 by race, ethnicity, and gender. So let me just show you a little bit about the trends. You'll see that in general, you see that there have been increase in the number of bachelor's degrees awarded in that 10-year period. And let me just explain what these numbers are. I wanted to show you a little bit of how you can use the data to look at trends. I just calculated here the change in the number of women who got degrees in math at the bachelor's degree level. And you see between 2018 and 2008, about 4,500 more women earned degrees in 2018 versus 2008. Let me explain what the last column is. I calculated what proportion of the degrees were awarded to women in 2008, and it was 44%. When I looked at it in 2018, it was 42%. So that delta is the 2%. Just wanted to explain what that meant. I thought this was the most useful way of looking at this. And what you can see is that there are decreases across every race ethnicity category in terms of their proportion, except for temporary residents. And those are the foreign students. That's where you see an increase. And that's part of a larger increase across all disciplines where there are more foreign students earning degrees at the undergraduate level at US institutions in all STEM fields. So this is another way to look at the data. So let me tell you how I got to this table. Okay, so similar to the indicators report, NCSES also produces something called the Women, Minorities, and Persons with Disabilities in Science and Engineering report. This is a general starting point for STEM diversity data in the US. It's an excellent resource. This is also required by Congress for NSF to produce this report. NCSES does this, and it's to really track the progress of underrepresented populations in STEM pathways. So the similar to the Science and Engineering Indicators report, there's lots of analysis, but there's lots of detailed data tables as well. And I've listed here some of the topics that are addressed in that report. One of those sections has information on degrees, institutions, and sources of support. And there's actually some very specific tables on undergraduate degree trends by demographic characteristics. Now I'm going to jump over to the web to show you how we get the data table that I showed you. So this is the Women Minorities homepage. This is an excellent resource if you're ever looking for diversity data in STEM. I want to point out that in addition to the report and the data tables, under additional resources, there are actually some videos that explain how to understand demographic data and how to use some of the tools and data files that are associated with this report. So let me jump over to the report, and you'll see it has a very similar look to Science and Engineering Indicators, and lots of information on different parts of the pathways. So enrollments, degree attainment, employment, occupation. I'm going to just jump down to the specific figures they have in this report on women. And you'll note that they've already produced a figure on women in mathematics and statistics. And if I just click on that, see, I get this very nice chart, and I'm going to pop it out so you can see it a little bit better. Get this very nice chart on the proportion of degrees awarded to women and men in 1998, 2008, and 2018. So similar to the indicators figures, you can download this, you can get the data table and so on. But this is a nice compiled data set that quickly gives you a picture of what's happening nationally for degrees at all levels in mathematics and statistics. In the next section of this report, there's information on underrepresented minorities. And in this case, I'm just going to pull out the data on Blacks and African-American students. And you can see, similar to the figure that I showed you overall for degree awards, this is degree awards for those who are Black or African-American. And you can see what those numbers look like for those in mathematics and statistics. Okay, so again, you can pop out the table, you can download it and all that wonderful stuff. But what I want to do with this report, unlike in indicators when we were pulling the figures, in this case, I want to pull a data table. So the data tables are actually listed here. And you'll see in the slide I had mentioned that there's a section on degrees, institutions, and sources of support. So let's click on that. And just immense number of tables. There must be, 50 or 60 tables here, but I'm going to point you to this one that's bachelor's degrees awarded by sex, field, citizenship, and race ethnicity. So let me just pull that data table up. And you'll see this is the table that you get. And it's quite incredibly detailed. So it has, both sexes, all fields, and then by race ethnicity. Right. And so if I just keep scrolling down, my apologies, it's going to take me a second to get to where the math data are, but there you go. This is what it looks like for bachelor's degrees awarded in mathematics and statistics by race ethnicity. And these are the numbers across the years. Now, if I keep scrolling down on this table, I will find the section of the table that has these same rows for women and for men. So the data table that I showed you, what I did was I downloaded this full table and just cut out the rows that had, men, women in the total. And that's how I created that table. Very simple Excel exercise that I'm sure you all are familiar with doing. And here's the download possibility. If I just hit that download button, I will get a window like this. And then, you can download the table and save it wherever you'd like. To make that figure. Okay, so let me go back to the presentation. So that's how you get the table that I just showed you. Now I want to show you a very similar, this is almost exactly the same table that I just showed you before, but in this case, I've created the table just for a single institution for UCLA. So I want to show you now yet another tool that allows us to get the data for a particular institution. I think this may be particularly of interest to those of you, who want to be monitoring what's happening at your institutions. I will say that all of these data tools, I would suspect that those at your institutions who are working in your institutional research offices are probably quite familiar with some of these tools. So, that's another resource for you to think about. But let me show you how you can get to this right from your desktop.
Nimmi, there's a question in the chat. Is there a way to get data separately for math and not including statistics?
Yes, there is. So actually, the data source that this comes from is called IPEDS, the Integrated Post-Secondary Educational Data System. Now they do have very, very fine field data. In most of the tools that are available, the public-facing tools, math and statistics are generally combined together, but that's primarily because statistics is a relatively small portion of the math. And so it's often very difficult for them to show the statistics data separately, and that's why they combine it with math. But it is possible in some of the tools to get that disaggregated information. But for most of the compiled data tools that I'm showing you, that level of detail isn't available. Okay, so let me show you how we get to this table. Again, we're going to start with a different type of data tool. NCSES, again, they're the kind of owners of this tool, and they actually have different types of tools for different types of data. The data that we're showing on degrees awarded These come from institutions. All of your institutions are required. It's a mandatory reporting requirement. They must report every year on the degrees that they award. And so what NCSES has is they have a data explorer where there are multiple tools. And then within that, there's a table builder. And that's what we're going to use today. We're going to do a custom table build. And then again, the data is actually from the Department of Education. And it's at the institutional level. So that's why you should be able to even go down to different campuses within a particular institution. So let me jump over to that data tool. Okay, so this is the homepage for the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics. And right at the top of the page here, you'll see a tab for exploring data. And I'm going to take a look at the data tools and resources. These are all the different data tools that they have available. You can do kind of explore data if you're just interested, and it will point you to different reports and compiled information. There's a chart builder if you'd actually like to build your own chart. And then there's a table builder, and that's what we're going to. Okay. As soon as I hit table builder, it's going to say, well, okay, thanks for telling me that. What kind of data do you actually want to look at? So I'm going to look at the IPEDS completions. And I want to point out here, I realize I'm going through this really fast, and it might seem really complicated, but this is one of those things that if you literally sit down and spend 10 or 15 minutes, it's pretty intuitive. There are training videos and lots of other examples online here. If you register with NCSES, you can save your data tables that you created one time if you want to come back to it later. So there's lots of great possibilities to use this data tool. Okay, so the first thing I want to tell the tool is what is it that I want on my table? And in this case, I want to show the number of degrees awarded. So I'm going to check that box and I'll say add it to the table. So now, the first thing that happens is it's immediately going to pop up for me all the data. So this is actually what this is showing is for every year, how many total degrees were awarded at US institutions at all degree levels. Okay, so that's what this is going to show me. So the next thing I want to do is, if you remember on our table, we had data for 2008 and 2018. So that's the next thing I want to tell it. Let me subset this to just the years that I wanted. The default is it's going to show you all the years. So I'm just going to clear those out. And I'm going to add 2018. And I'm going to add 2008. And I'll say update. Okay, so now it's just going to show me the 2 years of data. So you saw how it cut out all the other years. So the next thing we want to do is, well, we want to limit this to mathematics. So let me pick the field of study, and I will pick my academic discipline. And of course, there are hundreds and hundreds of disciplines. So I'm going to use the search feature and just type in math. And as you can see in this data set, mathematics and statistics that's an aggregate category that's available, but you can see that there are more detailed mathematics fields available further down on this list. So for example, if you wanted to look at mathematical biology, you could definitely just pull that out. But I'm going to stick with mathematics and statistics so that that's consistent with the figure and table that I have in my presentation. But you absolutely can check the more detailed fine fields if you'd like to. Okay, and then once I choose this, it's also going to show me the aggregate groups that it falls within. So mathematics and statistics as a minor category falls within math and computer science as a major category, and science and engineering overall. So it's going to show me how that aggregation works within the data set. Okay, so I'm going to add that to the column. So now we've subset this to math degrees. Wonderful. So we're making progress. Now, the next thing we want to do is subset this to award level. And in this case, we want to see just the bachelor's degrees. So I will toggle on bachelor's degrees and add that over and put that on my column as well. So now you can see the numbers are getting smaller now that we've added just the bachelor's degrees. The next thing I want to do is add race ethnicity. If you remember in our table, we had race ethnicity down the column. So I'm going to choose that category. These are all the different categories that are available, and we want to see all of them. So I'm just going to keep them all checked, and I'm going to add them to show down the row. Right, and immediately what you see is now that same data has been disaggregated, and it's showing you by all the race ethnic categories. And then the last thing we had on our table was gender. So we want to pick that as a variable. Sorry, let me get that again. And in this case, again, if you didn't want to look at both categories, if you just wanted to look at one, you could, but in our case, I think we want to have both. So I want to add that to the column. And then of course, so this gets us really close to the original table that we had for the national data, right? So then the last thing that I want to do now is I want to subset this to a particular institution. So I will pick my institution name and I will type in University of California. All right, and then I will pick UCLA down from the list. Put it over. And I just want you to watch what happens when I say click on the column, you'll see the numbers immediately change.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so now I have the data just for UCLA. Right? And you'll see these ellipses here at the corner. If I just click on that, I can then export the table. So one thing you'll notice here, this is a relatively new data tool. I know NCSES is still working on it, but it doesn't have all the totals and subtotals and things that we had on our table. So basically what I did is I exported this data table. I took the other table that we had and I just populated everything in there and added everything up. And that's how I got the data, the comparable data for UCLA. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my deck, and I'm going to stop here because this is where I'm gonna stop on the math degrees and trends, and just want to make sure that there weren't any other questions.
So there was one question in the chat, which is, has IPEDS changed their definition of success? It used to be problematic. Change of major is a failure. Do you have any information on that?
So the data that we're using here, it's called the completions data. So it's whatever institutions report as a completed degree. Now there are lots and lots of other types of IPEDS data that are collected about transfers and so on, or students who stop and come back. There's lots and lots of information. That's not what's in here, but I do know that there has been a long-standing concern about how students who stop for a while and leave and maybe they come back, or when a student leaves one institution, it's not necessarily a bad thing because they may be going to another institution, for example. Mm-hmm. Those kinds of things are incredibly challenging to track, but certainly Department of Ed and NCES, the National Center for Education Statistics, they are certainly working on how they can better track individuals so they can separate out kind of the positive outcomes that might happen versus those that we have more concern about.
Let me ask a question of the audience. So for those of you who've been watching this, do you see this as a tool that you might find useful if you could watch the training of doing it real slow? One of the things that we were thinking of doing with Nimmi would be to create a sort of 10-minute either link directly to existing resources, this is how you do it, but also, maybe have a math chair walk through, this is how I get the particular information. Is there interest on that kind of a thing? If you can just put it in the chat so I can get a sense of that, because we'd like to make this, a resource for you, not just a tipsy, come in, listen, go away. We want to be able to follow up with nice resources for you. So if this is one that you think would be helpful, we really want your feedback.
Yeah, and actually, okay. I want to point out that, like, for example, this table builder and some of the other tools that I showed you, there actually are videos that they have posted, training videos. And periodically, the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics, they actually have training sessions. so you can participate in some of those. I would say that usually at the training sessions, it typically ends up being folks like those who are maybe contemplating doing some research, or PIs who need to do a little research for their own grant writing, or institutional research folks.
Right.
So, lots of different types of users. But I will say too that it seems really complicated, but once you kind of get the hang of it, try it a couple of times. And I apologize, I was going really fast. I wanted to make sure that I gave you a breadth of tools to look at today, because I know you'll be able to go back and explore some of them yourself.
And we'll make sure that there's.
Since you're paused and it's not yet two, under Data Explorer, I don't see anything that says Table Builder. Would you be able to go to the Data Explorer?
Yeah, let me go back and let me go back to so that. Okay, so here's the NCSES homepage, and you've got the link here, and then there's this. Do you see right across the tab that says Explore Data, and then Data Tools and Resources, and here's the Table Builder.
Got it. Okay.
And as I said, in my slides, I will share them with you afterwards. Every single page is linked. So you should be able to use my slides to directly go to the Table Builder, or to this page for that matter. Okay.
Excellent. I think we're ready to keep going. Thanks.
Great. Okay. So, the data that I just showed you is kind of the end of the bachelor's degree pathway, right? It's what happens after they've matriculated through a program, successfully matriculated through a program. But in that continuum that I told you about at the beginning of my talk, there are actually steps that happen before that. So I want to take you through a couple of resources. Not all of them are data tools, so that you understand what's happening to students before they get to you. So at the kind of secondary level, right? So I chose a particular indicator on the AP Calculus outcomes of US students and how does that vary geographically. And again, this is another example of something from NCSES where it's interactive compiled data. So the data is compiled in a particular way, but you can do some customization of the information. So let me show you some of the things that I found. So this is one of the indicators that's available in map form, and it's on public high school students who score a 3 or higher on the AP Calculus AB exam. And so this is what the picture looks like nationally. So the darker the state, the higher the percentage of students who've achieved a 3 or higher. So this is one way of looking at that data. This is another way. The same data arrayed a different way, and it's kind of from first quartile to fourth quartile by state. Okay. So again, this is another tool that's associated with science and engineering indicators. And as I mentioned, it's an interactive data tool. And there are kind of two ways of comparing data. You can compare the indicator, like one indicator to another, or you can compare the same indicator across states. So there are actually about 150 different indicators that NCSES has put together, but there's a section on elementary and secondary education, and that's where we pulled this particular AP achievement indicator from. So let me just take you to that tool and walk you through some of the things that are possible to do. So again, we're right back to the homepage for science and engineering indicators, and right across the top, you'll see where it says state indicators, and I'm going to click on that. And as I mentioned, there's two ways of comparing the indicators. You can compare a single indicator, look across indicators, or you can compare states. And I'm going to just say, let's explore the indicators. So as I mentioned, the very first category that's there is elementary and secondary education. There's quite a large number of indicators here, some of which you may be familiar with. The 4th and 8th grade math performance and proficiency, which is from the NAEP data. And then there's some information about expenditures on elementary public schools. But this is the one, and kind of at the bottom of my screen in the middle, that's the indicator that I chose to show to you. There's another related indicator on AP exam taking, but that's more general. I chose this one since it was very specific to math. So let's click on that indicator. And the very first thing you see is that map that I put in my presentation. So that's one way of looking at the data. Another way of looking at the data was the bar chart. This is the one that I just showed you, but in the interactive version, one of the things you can do is you can, click down to see how it changes over time. So, that's a really nice tool to have. We also have spark charts by every state. So what you'll see is if I wanted to look at, for example, Minnesota, which is where I'm from, I can look at, what the proportion was in Minnesota versus the US average over time. That's another type of chart. And of course, there's a data table. One of the nice things you can see when you look at the data table is generally the percentages have been increasing over time, which is really good to see. All right, and you can use the little arrows here to toggle up and down. By state, you can make it alphabetical, whatever you'd like. And again, just like with all the other data and indicators, it's possible to download the data, it's possible to print the data, and so on and so forth. Okay, I want to go back to what would this look like if I was comparing states. So I'm gonna pull this other tab, and you'll see immediately I'll see all the states. I'm gonna pick Alabama. And I'm just gonna, there's some general statistics that kind of come up immediately. So R&D numbers and so on. I'm gonna get rid of all of these and I'm gonna add our indicator from our list. So I'm gonna add the 3 or higher on the AP calculus exam. Okay, so there's my AP, there's the indicator that we were looking at. I had chosen Alabama. I might want to pick another state. So let's see, let me pick California. I'll just go back up to this bar up here and then I'll pick California and hit compare. And now we'll see both California and Alabama on the list. So, why would this be important for those of you who are department chairs to look at? You may have a large proportion of students who are coming from your own state. This helps you kind of gauge where those students are in general. You might have students coming from multiple states. You can look at those other states. It just gives a general sense of where, how much geographic diversity there is and how much the values actually are quite different across the nation. Again, really important to know as you're thinking about your planning for your educational program. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my slides and I'm going to actually go to my next question. But before I do, I just want to make sure that there weren't any questions about the state indicators.
No, I don't think we had any in the chat about the state indicators.
Awesome. Okay, so there's another type of resource, again, that I wanted to make you aware of. Many of you may be. In addition to knowing what was happening at the K through 12 level, it's also helpful to understand what's happening with regard to your incoming freshmen. Some great indicators there on what's happening with freshmen. And I wanted to point out to you something called an annual pulse survey. It's a different kind of a data collection done annually, quick response, quickly trying to get some data on incoming freshmen. And it's called the Freshman National Norms. And let me just walk you through this one. Okay, so it's an annual, as I mentioned, an annual pulse survey. It's conducted by UCLA, the Higher Education Research Institute. While they collect information every year and what they typically report out is at the national level, it is possible to request data or custom reports on your institution if your institution participates in the survey. And there are about 1,000 institutions who do this, so very good representation there. So that's where you get some of the institutional level data. One of the really great things about this particular survey is that it has fantastic information on demographics of incoming freshmen and how that's changed. This survey has been conducted since the 1960s, so great source for trend information as well. But in addition to that, what's really interesting, I think, for this community is that there's a lot of information about math orientation. And by that, I mean, specific information about all students' preparedness with regard to math, whether they are coming into a math program or not. So these are some of the topics that are addressed in the report. And I just wanted to show you some of the data that I was able to pull from the report, the most recent report in 2019. The 2020 report will be coming up very shortly. So the first thing that caught my eye was the importance of academic reputation of intended major and college choice. So, this is basically asking incoming freshmen, like, what is the prestige of a particular discipline and in terms of how you chose your college. So at the top of the list here are health professions. So that's kind of, pre-med kind of students. And so here you see that math is kind of right in the middle of the pack in terms of, how important is the reputation of that particular discipline. So I'm not going to interpret this. I'm assuming that all of you mathematicians might be able to give a better interpretation of that, but I thought it was an interesting piece of information. I want to share that with you. Another piece of information is they actually collect from the freshmen how many years of each study of each of these topics did they have in high school. And what you can see here is large proportions of students have kind of computer science for half a year, biological science for 2 years. We see mathematics for 3 years, which is generally kind of considered college preparatory level. It's quite small. It's only about 1.4% of students have actually had three full years of a math course taking in high school. But another interesting thing is it's pretty much the same number for men and women, right? Okay, so let's dig into that a little bit deeper. Another piece of data in this particular report is how many what proportion of all the incoming freshmen intend to major in math. And here you start to see a small bit of a difference between men and women, despite the fact that similar proportions had the same amount of 3 years of math preparation. So let's look into that deeper. What else can the report tell us? Another question on this survey is they asked the students, rate yourself. Tell me if you think you are in the highest 10% or above average in mathematical ability compared to your peers. And look at the very big difference between incoming men and women. So anyway, I found this all terribly interesting. These questions that I've shown you are asked every single year. There's probably no other discipline that they ask similar questions like this for. So I wanted you to be aware of it. Great source of information. And as I mentioned, you could probably get this information for the students on your campus. And you could probably also ask for a custom table by those who intend to major in math as well as those who don't. So it could be a fantastic way of assessing the students who are taking your math courses, as many of them may not be math majors. Okay, I'm going to transition now to a little bit different type of data, but let me just stop again and see if there are any questions.
I think less of a question and more of a comment. Do you think we're going to move to first-year students rather than freshmen as
we actually talked to the folks at Harry about this, and they're kind of going back and forth. They've had the same kind of brand name for such a long time, but I think and also first time, first enrolled, that's another way that they classified this. So we're definitely using freshmen as a shorthand, and probably I can't imagine it will stay that way for a very long time.
Thank you.
Okay, so I want to reorient you back to where we started. This is the first figure that I showed you on trends in bachelor's degrees in math. And in the Science and Engineering Indicators Report, this table exists for bachelor's degrees, but a similar table exists for master's and for doctoral degrees. So I pulled all three together, and this is what it looks like. Okay, but the important thing to note about this is if all the trends are going up, which is good. The doctoral degrees looks very flat, but that's just really the scale. Okay, but the most important thing to note here is there are over 42,000 students getting degrees in math at U.S. institutions every year. That's a lot of people. So that kind of begs the question, well, what happens to them after they leave, right? So what are the workforce characteristics of recent bachelor's degree holders in math? And NCSES has lots and lots of data on this, and tons of tables similar to what I've already shown you. They also have a very detailed custom table builder from a different set of surveys on the workforce. And I just pulled one set of data that I wanted to share with you. This figure are those who hold at least one degree in math. It could be at the bachelor's level, it could be at the doctoral level, it could be master's level. They hold at least one degree in math, and they're 35 years of age or younger, and they're in the US labor market. And this is their occupation and their sector. So the occupations, and I've customized this for this group. The occupations on the left are the most prevalent, most common occupations among those with math degrees. So nothing surprising, right? They're mathematical scientists, they're computer and information scientists, they're teachers at the post-secondary level, or they're teachers at the pre-college level. Those are the most prevalent occupations. But you'll note that there's some other occupations out there that are pretty large as well. Engineering, health-related occupations, management-related occupations. And there's actually probably 150 occupations I could have put on this chart, but I just pulled out some of the biggest ones. And then the color coding is just what sector of the economy they work in. So what you can see is the vast majority of folks are either in the education or business industry sector, very small slivers of people who are working in government. Okay, so this is actually from quite an advanced data tool, and I just want to spend a couple of minutes going over it with you, but I also want to make sure that I give you the sources where you can actually just look at the data tables instead of looking at trying to use this particular tool. So again, it goes back to our Data Explorer, where we had lots of different data tools. One of the other data tools is a different custom table builder called CSTAT. The data that I'm pulling is from the National Survey of College Graduates, which is a biennial survey of all college graduates in the United States. So covers 65 million people actually. And then, there is some detailed statistical tables, and there's a link to that here. And I'm just gonna quickly toggle over to this particular table builder, because I wanna show you some of the really cool things that you can do with that. So again, we'll go to Explore Data, Data Tools and Resources, and there's CSTAT right on the right-hand side, and I will just double click on that. Okay, so this is what the kind of entry point for this survey, for this data tool looks like. And I just want to point you to this big white box on the right-hand side where it's 93,000 records. It's a sample survey. It's representative of all college graduates in the United States, covering 64.7 million of them. So it represents a population of 65 million people. Now, I'm not going to actually I'd happy to do this offline with any of you that you'd like, and you can definitely use the videos, but I did want to show you some of the really, really interesting data that you can pull from this particular data set. So the first thing I did was I said, okay, well, there's 65 million people. Let's break it down by gender. So this is the first table that I was able to run, right? And you can see how it breaks out. And actually what you see is that there are more women with college degrees in the United States than there are men. Okay? So the next table that I looked at was, I said, well, okay, that's fine, but I really need to know how many people have a degree in math. So this table is actually the number of people whose highest degree is in math. So that could be a bachelor's, a master's, a doctorate, right? But just like many of you, there are probably people with multiple degrees in math. So I want to know how many people have at least one degree in math. And here's the table that I came up with there. So that this data set actually has an inventory of every individual's degree. And then you can pull out, you can search for, any one degree in math. And you see that there's almost 1 million people. So I want you to think about what that means. There are 65 million people with college degrees in the United States. Almost 1 million of them have a degree in math. Right, so that's an interesting perspective. Okay, so now I want to subset that to people who are earlier in their careers. So I chose folks who are age 35 or younger. So when I do that, there's another filter that I can put in by age. And now I see that there's about 207,000 people in the US with at least one degree in math who are under the age of 35. So, but what's their labor force status? Well, and gender. So when I look at this, basically what I see is the vast majority of them are employed, right? 91% of these people who are under the age of 35 are employed. There's a small number that are unemployed and some that are not in the labor force. So, and I want to be very clear that unemployed percentage, that is not the unemployment rate. That is just the number of people who said, I'm not working, but I want to be working. Okay, and then not in the labor force are people who are just, they're not looking for a job, so on and so forth. Okay, so this is another way that we can look at this data. But for some of these folks, I want to know, well, if they're not working, or even if they are, how many of them are actually employed for or enrolled for higher education? And this is another element that's in this data set. We can look at how many of them are employed full-time or part-time or taking courses and so on. This is another interesting way for us to be able to look at this data. And what you can see here is that there are more men than women pursuing higher education, right? Because this would be after they got their bachelor's degree. Okay. So now I'm going to remove the enrollment, and I'm just going to look at, well, where do the, this is both whether they're employed and their enrollment status. So this is another way of looking at the data. The next thing I wanted to look at is what sector do they work in? So again, I just pulled the sector, and you can see there's different detail that we can have. So I showed in the figure that I showed you, it just had business, government, academic sector. This one has a little bit more detail. It has 4-year, 2-year, different types of business industry and different types of government. But then I want to know, well, that's fine, but what job do they have? And so these are the major job categories that people with a math degree, these are the categories that they work in. And then of course, the more detailed, I really wanted to know much more detail. I'd like to be able to tell the difference between a mathematical scientist and a computer scientist. So again, this is the additional detail that we can pull from this data set. And the really nice thing is it puts it in categories for us too. So it tells us these are computer and math scientists, and those are the 3 subcategories underneath that. These are the biological scientists and so on. And so this table, I go back up to the top here and you'll see that there's a link to download the Excel spreadsheet. So I downloaded that file, and that's how I created the figure that I showed you on this previous page. Let me go back to that. That's how I got to this figure. So with that, I'm going to stop. I realized that last one was really complicated, and I apologize for it, but I wanted you to be aware of the level of detail that's there if you're willing to put in the effort, right? And it may not be you, maybe somebody in your office. I know many of you have analysts who work with you. These are all the tools that are available to them to use. All of these tools are publicly available. There's nothing I showed you today that's behind any kind of a firewall or anything like that. You don't have to register. You can just use all the links that I will give you with my PowerPoint. So with that, I'm going to stop. And I know we're a little over time, but I'd be happy to take any questions if you have the time.
So let's start by thanking Nimmi for this very rich presentation. And then I know Matt is going to have to take off. I have a few minutes that I can stay for questions, but please, I understand that you're all chairs, you're all busy, and I apologize for running over. We will be disciplined in our next meeting. Our plan is to follow up on this meeting to use data towards creating, broadening the mathematical community in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So how can we use information, go from data to information to action? That's going to be the focus of our follow-up meeting in April. So look ahead for that announcement. And if you have particular suggestions, feel free to email me. I'm going to put my email in the chat, because we want this to be useful for you. It's not about us.
And,
Okay, are there any questions for Nimmi?
I see one in the chat.
Oh,
Easy
sorry,
question
Matt,
to
go ahead.
answer.
well, I do have to run because of I'm meeting a job candidate, but Nimmi, that was just amazing. Thank you so much for doing it. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate having the opportunity to be with lots of like-minded people who don't mind kind of running through all of this minutia.
Go ahead, Nimmi. Yeah, were you going to look at Katie's question?
Yeah, Katie
Or-
asked
yeah.
a question about aggregate sources of math major enrollment numbers. Absolutely. So I didn't do that today, but I think in one of the previous presentations that I gave to TPSE, I actually did run through the enrollment data that's available at the graduate level. So definitely you can do that. And similar to the IPEDS completion data, you can look at that down at the institution level, right? For undergraduate, it's a little bit more challenging, right? So I would probably say the professional societies probably have better data than the national data sets do, just because undergraduate students don't tend to declare their discipline until they're matriculating further on. And so we have engineering has fantastic data through their professional societies. The other disciplines don't. So not as much information at the undergraduate level.
Right. And I think we can probably dig up the recording of Nimmi, not at TPSE, but at the
Committee on Education.
At the Committee on Education, where you gave a similar presentation. So if I can find, if Tyler can find that, Tyler's gone.
Or Katie, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to point you to the right place. It was kind of in the background of one of the places that I went to today. So happy to point that out to you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions, comments? Well, okay, well, thank you all for joining us and for sticking it out, the survivors, the ones who stuck it out to the very end. And we'll hope to see you all on April 21st. So again, please feel free to email me if you have any comments, questions, suggestions, concerns.
Thank you all.